Welcome to the Frontline Voices. Before we begin this haunting story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Portrait photographer David Sullivan thought his vintage camera was just bringing him luck with dramatic shots. For 3 months, every person he photographed seemed to capture something profound in their eyes, a depth that made his portraits extraordinary. But when David started following up with clients, he discovered a horrifying pattern. Every single person he'd photographed had passed away within 48 hours. Not from anything violent or suspicious. Heart attacks, accidents, natural causes. Until the day he looked through his viewfinder to test the camera and saw his own reflection staring back. David Sullivan's photography studio in downtown Portland had been struggling for 2 years. Wedding bookings were down. Portrait sessions were rare. He was 3 months behind on rent when he found the camera at Morrison estate sale. The vintage Leica 3F looked pristine despite being from 1952. The seller, Mrs. Morrison's grandson, seemed eager to get rid of it. "Belonged to my grandfather," he said. Professional photographer back in the day, camera served him well, but, let's just say his later work got a bit strange. David paid $300 for what should have been a $3,000 camera. Best investment he'd ever made. Within a week, his work transformed. Every portrait had an otherworldly quality. Clients' eyes seemed to hold depths that hadn't been there during the actual session. The photographs captured something beyond the surface, a raw honesty that was both beautiful and unsettling. "There's something different about your work now," said Maria Santos after her headshot session. "It's like you can see into people's souls." David's bookings tripled. His Instagram followers jumped from 500 to 15,000. Photography blogs featured his work. Everyone wanted to know his secret. He thought it was just the camera's superior optics, German engineering from photography's golden age. But then the pattern emerged. It started with Robert Chen, a businessman who'd booked a corporate headshot session on September 15th. David remembered the shoot clearly. Robert had been nervous, kept checking his phone. But when David looked through the Leica's viewfinder, Robert's expression changed. For just a moment, there was a peaceful acceptance in his eyes. The photograph was stunning. Robert's usual corporate mask was gone, replaced by something profound and final. 2 days later, David saw Robert's obituary. Heart attack at age 34. No prior health issues. Coincidence, David thought. Then came Jennifer Walsh, the young mother who'd wanted family portraits. During the individual shots, David captured something extraordinary in her eyes, a mixture of love and farewell. The image was so powerful it brought tears to clients who saw it in his portfolio. Jennifer died in a car accident 36 hours later, survived by husband and 2 children. David felt sick, but told himself it was just bad luck. The third case was harder to dismiss. Thomas Wright, age 67, retirement portraits for his law firm, healthy, active, planning a cruise with his wife. During the session, Thomas kept talking about his grandchildren, his future plans. But through the Leica's lens, David saw something else. A quiet resignation, as if Thomas was saying goodbye without knowing it. Thomas had a stroke that night, passed away peacefully in his sleep. David pulled out his appointment book and started cross-referencing dates. His hands shook as the pattern became undeniable. September 15th. Robert Chen photographed. Died. September 17th. September 22nd. Jennifer Walsh photographed. Died. September 23rd. September 28th. Thomas Wright photographed. Died. September 29th. October 3. Sarah Kim photographed. Died. October 5th. October 8th. Michael Torres photographed. Died. October 9th. 12 clients. 12 deaths, all within 48 hours of their photo sessions. David stared at the Leica on his desk. What had Mrs. Morrison's grandson said? His later work got a bit strange. That night, David researched the camera's previous owner. Marcus Morrison had been a successful portrait photographer in the 1950s and 60s. His early work was conventional, well regarded, but his later photographs had a haunting quality that made people uncomfortable. David found a 1968 newspaper article, "Local Photographer's Final Exhibition Disturbs Visitors." The article described Morrison's last show, portraits that seemed to capture subjects at their most vulnerable moments. The exhibition closed early due to complaints. Marcus Morrison died alone in his studio in 1969, found with the Leica in his hands. David tried to put the camera away, but his business was finally thriving. He had a waiting list of clients. Could he really stop now? He convinced himself the deaths were coincidental. People died every day. He was just noticing it more because of the guilt. But the pattern continued. October 15th, Elizabeth Harper, age 43, anniversary portraits, died October 16th, allergic reaction. October 20th, James Peterson, age 29, engagement photos. Died October 22nd, climbing accident. October 25th, Ruth Williams, age 78, grandmother portraits. Died October 26th, peacefully in her sleep. David couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time he looked through the viewfinder, he saw that same expression, peaceful acceptance, as if his subjects were unconsciously preparing for departure. He decided to test his theory. On October 30th, he set up the camera to photograph himself. If the camera really was cursed, if it really could predict death, then he would see it in his own eyes. David adjusted the tripod, set the timer, and positioned himself in front of the lens. He looked into the camera, trying to appear natural. Through the viewfinder's reflection, he saw his own face. But something was wrong. His eyes held that same expression he'd seen in all his subjects, the peaceful acceptance, the unconscious farewell. The timer clicked. The shutter released. David's hands trembled as he developed the photograph. When it emerged in the developer solution, he nearly collapsed. The image showed him exactly as he'd feared, eyes holding depths of acceptance, as if saying goodbye to everything he'd ever known. According to his own pattern, he had 48 hours to live. David tried to destroy the camera, but couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he researched everything about curses, supernatural photography, objects that held dark power. He found stories of cursed cameras throughout history, the Polaroid that showed ghosts, the daguerreotype that trapped souls, but nothing about cameras that predicted death. On November 1st, with less than 24 hours remaining, David made a desperate decision. He would use the camera's power for good. If he was going to die anyway, maybe he could save someone else. He posted an emergency message on social media. "Free portrait session today only. First person to respond gets professional headshots at no charge." Rebecca Martinez, a struggling actress, responded within minutes. When Rebecca arrived, David explained nothing about the camera's history. He simply positioned her for the portrait and looked through the viewfinder. Rebecca's eyes were bright, full of life and ambition. No sign of the peaceful acceptance he'd learned to recognize. David smiled for the first time in weeks. The camera showed Rebecca had a full life ahead of her. But when David looked at his own reflection in the studio mirror behind Rebecca, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Standing behind his own reflection was another figure. Shadowy, indistinct, but unmistakably there. The figure was reaching toward him with one ghostly hand. David spun around. Nothing there. He looked back at the mirror. The shadow figure was gone, but his own reflection now held that familiar expression. The acceptance, the farewell. His time was up. That evening, David carefully packed the Leica back in its original case. He wrote a detailed letter explaining everything he'd discovered, every death connected to the camera, every pattern he'd noticed. He addressed the package to the local police with instructions that the camera should never be used again. As David sealed the package, he felt strangely at peace, the same peace he'd seen in the eyes of all his subjects. The next morning, David's assistant found him in his studio, seated in his favorite chair, the sealed package on his desk. He looked peaceful, as if he'd simply fallen asleep. The coroner ruled it heart failure. Natural causes. David Sullivan, age 32, died peacefully with no signs of distress. The package was delivered to police as instructed. Detective Sarah Chen read David's letter with growing unease. She ordered the camera locked in evidence storage, tagged as potentially dangerous. But 6 months later, budget cuts forced the police to sell unclaimed evidence. The Leica 3RF went back to auction, back to estate sales, back to someone who would think they'd found an incredible bargain. The cycle would continue. Did this story make you think differently about the objects we bring into our lives? Do you believe some items can hold dark energy? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe stories about the supernatural consequences of our choices need to be heard, don't forget to follow the Frontline Voices.